Hi, everyone. Hello.
Okay, so the time is 7:32, and tonight it's not a Jewish time. We have to start on time. So, Erev Tov, and we say good evening. Welcome to Congregation Ahavat Olam, or as we like to call it, the Shul at 1600. Again, thank you for joining us in person, and thank you for all those who join us on Zoom. Zoom is an amazing thing, right? I'm Rabbi Idan. I'm the founding rabbi of this congregation, Congregation Ahavat Olam, and I'm very, very excited to welcome my dear friend Steven Rosenberg, the editor and publisher of the Jewish Journal, to discuss his recent trip to Israel. On February 25th, Steve published an extensive and very powerful article in the Jewish Journal summarizing his trip. If you haven't read it yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's a very good article. It's a moving piece of journalism with interesting interviews of individuals and insight into the current situation in Israel after the October 7th massacre. Steve and I have been friends for many years. Einat, my wife, and I have known Steve and his family probably since we moved to the States in 1997. So I have the privilege and honor to introduce our guest, Steve Rosenberg. Quick bio. It's not quick with you, Steve, but we're really, really fortunate to have you here with us. So Steve Rosenberg is the publisher and editor of the Jewish Journal, a native of Swampscott. He holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from UMass Amherst and MFA, Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from Bennington College. He has extensive media and management experience, having worked in print and broadcast journalism since 1981. Steve joined.
We had to give that one away, right?
Yeah. Steve joined. I was still alive. Steve joined the Jewish Journal in 2017. Prior to his arrival, he served as the staff writer for the Boston Globe for 15 years. Steve was a member of the staff at the Boston Globe that was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 2014 for its coverage of the Boston Marathon bombings. In addition, Steve also served as editor of the Jewish Advocate, managed 2 TV stations, and worked as a documentary filmmaker. He has contributed to numerous publications, including the New York Times, Haaretz, and the Jerusalem Post. His broadcast work has been seen on CBS, PBS, CNN, Fox News, and Israeli TV. Steve has reported extensively from Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, and has made several films on Hamas and UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Closer to home, he has served as an adjunct professor at Salem State University and has also written and edited several books, including Middle Class Heroes, Voices from Boston's Suburbs. So, wow. Steve, before we play the short movie that you made in Israel, just a second.
Test, 1, 2. We're not going out? Check.
Is it better now? Yeah, okay. I
Okay.
just raised my volume. So, Steve, let me know if you hear anything. before we play the short movie that you made in Israel, could you please briefly describe what we are about to see, and specifically the places you visited in Israel, the people you interviewed, who organized the trip, and the purpose of your trip?
Okay, so I'll start with the last questions, which is who organized it and the purpose of the trip. I organized it because I wanted to, I couldn't read the story that I wanted to read. I was looking for it. There was a lot of stuff about Gaza by the time I decided to go. And there wasn't the story that I wanted to read about Israel. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the impact, the overall impact, how Israelis were doing, how they were responding to October 7th, the overall, and what was the psychological impact of the country? How are they doing? What was the outlook militarily? Was there a solution there? How are the soldiers doing? How are the people doing? And then I learned so much about Israeli culture, even though I've been there so long. So yeah, I wanted to go there, and I decided I would write the story that I wanted to read, so I would have to report it. So I was there for about 15 days in January, and I was all over the country, and I took a lot of video. I found myself shooting because what I was seeing, I realized would be a major part of the history of the country of Israel. This impact and the transition during this war, how Israelis were responding. So what you'll see is my visit to the south, which is, it starts off with scenes from the Nova site, and also scenes from Kibbutz Be'eri, where Hamas attacked both of these places. Then you'll see video from an area called Hostages Square, which is actually the pavilion at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art in downtown Tel Aviv, which is across from the Kiryat, Israel's Pentagon. And there they've set up a whole installation dedicated to the hostages. There's now 130 plus hostages still in Gaza. Originally there were over 250 taken there. This is a place where there's a lot of art to help Israelis and other visitors process the whole idea that people would be dragged from their homes or at a concert where people were dancing and brought to Gaza and held there. They're still being held there. So you'll see that, and you'll also hear an interview with a soldier. I visited soldiers at Tel HaShomer, which is, I believe, the largest hospital in Israel.
The center ones, yeah.
Yeah, one of them. And I spoke with a fellow by the name of Yoav, and you'll hear him talk. He actually, first of all, he was sitting in a wheelchair, and he had been to Gaza and was hit by an RPG and lost part of his leg. He had, just a little backstory, he knows this Boston area well because he went to Camp Ramah for 16 years. So we had a lot in common. We talked about Boston. He knows Boston well. He knows Faneuil Hall. He talked about visiting Salem. And he woke up on October 7th, and it was just, he had gone to the Red Sea, to the city, the coastal town of Nueva. I don't know if any of you know it. It's it used to be a very popular hangout for Israelis when Israel held the Sinai. And he woke up there, he was visiting there, his birthday was October 3rd. So on October 7th, he woke up, he was having coffee around 7 in the morning, and someone mentioned there's rockets in Israel. He immediately left. He was at the border the Israeli border at 9 a.m., and by 10 p.m., he was at his army base. And in early to mid-November, he was involved in a very specific attack, and he was injured, and you'll hear what he has to say. And then at the very end, I show some scenes of people dancing, because not all Israelis are in their homes. They have to go out. They have to try to find some normal life again. So you'll see that they're okay with dancing.
Thank you, Steve.
Have most of you seen the video, or some of you have? Okay.
All right, so let's see the video.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine a place where hundreds of people were murdered in a matter of an hour or two. But if there is a place on earth that's the most well documented at this time, it is this place, the site of the Nova Festival on October 7th. The pictures here are of all of the people who were murdered in the most horrific ways, the most horrific behavior man can exhibit.
In this community, they stopped the car coming in, and they took control of the car. They killed the individual in the car, and they were able actually to open the gate, and then they managed to keep the gate open and kill the people and the security people here as well. And then from here, they spread out within the community.
How many attacked here?
There were about 70 people who attacked here.
70?
In this community, 70 terrorists.
And
And it took about, all in all, about 18 hours before the attack was finished.
where was Vivian's body found, and what condition was her body?
It was found in this house. I can't say on record where it was due to the family's request. It was burned severely, as we talked about. As many of the bodies were burned to the extent that there was no remains. So we had to bring in, like we talked about, special teams of archaeologists to identify what we could. At times, all that was left was teeth. So this was a similar case, and here it took a month and a half to identify the body. So for a month and a half, we didn't know if Vivian is kidnapped or if she was murdered in her house.
This is a tunnel that was built here at Hostages Square. Is this your first time here?
Yes.
What are you feeling now? What are you thinking about when you see all this?
I feel very sad and very frustrated. And today, this is my first time I came here after a very long time of not being ready, not feeling ready. Yesterday was my grandson's first birthday, and he's just one day older than Phil Bibas, whose birthday today. And I just couldn't stay home.
So you're a therapist. What do you believe is the psychological impact of October 7th on Israel, on Israelis?
I believe it's first loss of security, or sense of security, and break of trust and authorities and like the world as it was before October 7th. And for long term, we need to wait and see. I believe we just have a post-traumatic society here.
Where are you from, Maya?
I'm from Mir Moshe, that is 7 kilometers and 200 meters from the border. We are not considered a danger zone, but my family is from Kfar Aza and from Nir Oz, and I lost friends, I lost family. Some were murdered, some were kidnapped. Kfar Aza, there are still 5 hostages. This is Elad, he is the brother of my sister-in-law Karmit. They are from Nir Oz. Him and his mother were taken hostage. His father, Rami, was murdered. His mother was released with the first deal after 49 days. She is still hospitalized. Her health condition is still very, very bad. She is still fighting for her life. She lost 20 kilos in 49 days. Elad has been there 104 days. We know his situation is not good. We last heard, got a signal of life on January 5th. I don't know what else to say. We need to bring them home. He needs a hearing aid. He lost a lot of weight. We saw it in the video. We are very worried about him, and we need him home now.
And then someone shot an RPG missile that hit right between us. And I remember flying in the air, and I landed on my back, and I saw that my leg was, crooked. I saw a bone, and I saw my foot, in a crooked position. And the first thing that I think about is the next hit, because the natural response to an RPG is another RPG a couple of seconds later. That's how they roll.
good to see everybody back with us. So it means that the sound did work and everything worked. It's good. So, Steve, in your observation, how would you describe the general mood, the atmosphere, the emotions in Israel, among Israelis? And perhaps you could also discuss the psychological impact of October 7 on Israelis and also the resilience of Israelis.
So let's start with the psychological impact. I was very interested in that story, and I talked to a lot of the country's top therapists, psychiatrists, people who are involved, very involved in treating everyone from the hostages to the general population. And as the psychologist in the film alluded to, the rate of post-traumatic syndrome disorder is through the roof now. There's an estimate of at least 600,000 Israelis now have PTSD. And there's also a host of other psychological conditions that have been brought on by October 7th, serious anxiety among adults and children, depression, sadness, fear, and lack of trust, and also just general malaise. So it's a big impact. We won't know exactly what will be probably for a couple of years. That said, there is a resilience in Israel that is astonishing. It's a strength, a unity, a determination that I found that I didn't expect to find, a connection. And maybe you could talk about it because you're Israeli and we talked about it a little bit before.
Yeah, so I was in Israel last time in July, so you are much more updated with the mood in Israel. But yeah, I can attest as an Israeli that Israel is usually, very patriotic, resilient, obviously. And I know that, we discussed this before. You called it Ahavat Israel, the love of Israel or the love of Jews. I would call it also Kol Israel Arevim Ze Bazeh, which means that all Israel responsible for one another. And since October 7th, we have seen many Israelis moving from the south, from Gaza / Hamas, and from the north, which is Lebanon and Hezbollah, to the center of Israel. So we saw that back on Israelis and patriotism and care for one another, some of these people have been displaced to hotels, I should say, provided by the government, while others are staying with host families. We also witnessed the installation of empty Shabbat tables in Tel Aviv to raise awareness for the hostages that's still in Gaza, as well as demonstrations on Ossetia Square demanding their return. So yeah, absolutely, I can see that. But from your experience visiting just recently, could you elaborate on just that, what you experienced, the feeling of unity, the care among Israelis during this challenging time?
It's just the atmosphere there was very much one of unity and strength and openness to connect, a very serious awareness of the situation, that Israel is at war. Things are not what they were before October 7th, and there needs to be unity. And Israelis are amazing in challenging situations. I've seen it before. They come together like no group of people I have ever seen in my life. There's such a sense of connection and care for one another. It's really remarkable. We could learn so much from it. I wish we had it here in America. And I hope it stays in Israel after the war ends.
Everybody is talking about, Israel's robust and advanced security. However, we all know, we all experienced the opposite, right? On October 7th, it was really a total security collapse. Did you feel safe while in Israel? Are people now more cautious and less trusting in Israel's security?
I felt safe, but I've been to Israel a lot, and I know where to go and where not to go. And I think the general population, I've talked about this, I wrote about this, and you could even elaborate on it much better than me, probably. There's a social contract, right? That Israel was born out of the Holocaust and born out of a lot of chaos. So you had Holocaust survivors, you had people coming to Israel from so many different countries, including a lot of Arab countries. So I think the first part of that social contract was to protect every citizen. That's one of the major reasons why Israelis see the need for a government and an army, and they're in a very tough neighborhood. So a lot of Israelis feel that Israel failed on October 7th to protect its citizens. There was a long gap. In some cases, 10 hours, 12 hours, some cases more than that. Mm-hmm. Fighting went on in this kibbutz here that you saw on the film, there were still terrorists there 4 or 5 days after the attack. They were finding them. Yeah. So in that first sense, the social contract was broken, and then there's this immense connection to the Israelis who are being held in Gaza. You see it everywhere. You see pictures of the kidnapped everywhere you go. You can't go for a minute without seeing pictures of the kidnapped. They're on buildings. They're huge, big pictures. We're talking about 30, 40-foot pictures all over Tel Aviv, all over Jerusalem, all over the main cities, in bus stations, in the train stations. So there's a sense that Israel has failed the population, its citizens, by not bringing them back. And hence you have a huge distrust right now in the government. I talked to one of my sources just yesterday who was in my story. He was a former head of the Israel security services in Jerusalem, the Shin Bet. He said 19% now, and it's been pretty steady, support the current government. So there's a lot of anger.
You said 19, 19. I was trying to avoid bringing politics, but let me ask you something about that. It's interesting what you just said. So I think that not many people understand the election system in Israel. And even though I would say that Benjamin Netanyahu's approval dropped, as you said, significantly in the polls, and there are calls by many, mainly in Tel Aviv, I would say, right? There's a call for an election. Do you believe that, based on Israel's election system, that anyone else can become a prime minister other than Netanyahu? That's my first question. And what I'm referring to here is a situation where even if his Likud party may lose in the election, I can't see anyone else but Netanyahu as the prime minister again, based on the election system in Israel. Am I totally off?
Depends when they have the election. If they had the election today, and you believe the polls, which have historically been wrong in Israel, then there would be a new government. But there's been how many elections? 5 elections in the last 7 years, something like that. So there's been a lot of elections. There's a lack of leadership. That's the bottom line. That's what Israelis are talking about. There's a lack of leadership, of new leadership coming through. And people aren't really even excited about Benny Gantz. And if he were to run today, the polls say he would overwhelmingly be able to create a coalition. You need 61 seats.
That's why. That's my point.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking that, because we had Yair Lapid before, right, who established a government with Naftali Bennett, which Bennett only received 7 mandates. That's my point. It didn't last long. So again, it's extremely hard, I think, for other than Netanyahu, the other parties, to create a coalition with 61 mandates. And that's why I said, I was asking you, what do you think? Because even if his Likud party lose, they will still able to form a coalition.
But things have changed since October 7th. A lot of Netanyahu's base has changed. They're furious that they were not protected. Their children were not protected. Their grandchildren were not protected. They're looking for someone else. As soon as elections can be held, I think Israelis, the majority of Israelis would like that to happen. There's a question of when that will happen.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a very strong. Even though he has a very strong grip on the government, but it doesn't really reflect the country per se. And I think that these issues are now starting to come out even within this unity and within the war. There's a lot of talk right now about the ultra-Orthodox having to do public service. Mm-hmm. And there's 600,000, I believe, Haredim who are available to do this public service. And in this war, I think the number is 166 enrolled in the army. So I think these issues that were buried for a long time about contributions of certain groups of people are coming to the surface now, and there's a lot of discussion. People want them to be involved, want them to contribute to the society other than learning Torah. So I do believe there will be a change. I think that people just want to move on from Netanyahu. They want a clean cut.
So let me ask you something. You met with high-ranking officials in Israel, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
In their views, talking to them, what are the next steps for Israel as a country and its future relationship with the Palestinians?
I think there's an understanding among, lifetime military people, such as the people I spoke with. I spoke with the former head of the Shin Bet, Ami Ayalon. I spoke with Roni Shaked, who is my source, who just talked about the Bibi having 19%. He led the Jerusalem office of the Shin Bet. Ami Ayalon led the whole Shin Bet, which is in charge of the internal security for the whole country. And I also spoke with Ehud Olmert in his office, who was a former prime minister. All these people told me there is no military solution other than waging perpetual war. The flip side is You can't just jump into a two-state solution because neither side is prepared for that. Now, there's so much distrust. There's so much anger. There's so much talk of revenge on both sides. But that seems to be in the works, at least by Western countries like the United States and England and France and all the other countries that do support Israel. They're kind of demanding that now. And even Omer told me, all of these folks told me it's going to take 40, 50, 60 years. There'll be terror attacks. There'll be disappointments. There'll be a lack of trust, but you have to try it.
So let me ask you a question, Steve. I'm always asking questions, right? That's my, yeah.
And the idea of greater Israel is not sustainable. That's what they kept saying. It's not sustainable. If you want to have a Jewish state, you can't have 5 million, you can't govern or occupy, I don't like to use that word, you can't govern 5 million, Palestinians who want their own state. So they don't believe, they think that that is the biggest threat, not Hamas and not Hezbollah, but the internal threat of incorporating 5 million into the Israeli population.
Well, so you brought a two-state solution, and polls, we're back to polls now, report that close to 70% of the Palestinians in Gaza, and very similar numbers also in the West Bank, support Hamas. So considering the educational system that teaches Palestinian children to use guns from a young age and indoctrinates them to become suicide bombers and martyrs, do you believe a two-state solution is still a reality? Is it achievable?
That's a loaded question. I guess in my dreams, perhaps, but right now, no. The incitement and the educational system and the curriculum of the Palestinians has to change. You think about it. The Palestinians who attacked these kibbutzim and the Nova Festival, and they went running around killing people. They almost made it to Beersheba. Right. It was, what they did, they just were not stopped. Anyway, a lot of these people had never even seen a Jew before in their whole life, because Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. Yeah. So that was 19 years ago. So they've been inculcated with a curriculum that's designed to demonize the Jew, to make the Jews subhuman. And I've actually done a lot of reporting on this. I've made several films, actually about 15, on Hamas and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which is now in the news, and America is one of their top supporters. Year after year, they've been giving at least $300 million for decades. And this is an organization that is in charge of 337,000 Palestinian children in schools. And there they learn to hate Jews. They don't call them Israelis. They call them Jews. Right. They use the word Yehud, which is the Arabic word for Jews. So there's such a hatred. They don't even think Jews are human. They call them subhuman. They're the children of apes and whatever. I've done a lot of reporting on this, and there's this noxious mix of Islamic theology. It's a militant theology that you have to kill Jews. We have to protect Al-Aqsa, which is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and that's the way to conquer Israel. So there's no talk of coexistence, of two states, of peace. You never hear about it. You never hear about peace. Instead, you just hear about jihad. There's one thing
which is a holy war.
yes. There's another thing. Hamas has representatives in these UNRWA schools, and they call them Al-Qutla clubs. And they're like after-school clubs, and they teach them, military training. Every summer, 15,000 children are handed guns at a summer camp run by Hamas. This is the reality, and they're taught how to use automatic weapons, how to stab, how to kidnap. This is not made up. This has been going on for well over a decade, and I've made films about it, and you can see them on the internet. This is the reality. So I think Israel would love a divorce, but it needs a partner right now.
Yair Lapid said it. We don't want to stay in marriage. We wanted to get divorced.
Yes, and they need a divorce, and then, then maybe they can do business together.
But isn't it, even, I'm just trying to be realistic here.
Yeah.
Because to me, right now it's a three-state solution. It's not a two-state solution.
Correct.
Because I can see Gaza and the West Bank getting together. So we're looking at a three-state solution. I think that at one point there was the idea, but Hamas said we will build tunnels to go to the West Bank, which means under Jerusalem, and Israel said absolutely not. So I think it's just a deeper issue there. And if I remember it correctly, in 2004, when Ariel Sharon withdrew from Gaza, I believe it was Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman, who was far right, who said, let us keep Gaza, and we'll give the Palestinians the same amount of land in the West Bank, so you have a territorial continuation, and this is how you have a two-state solution. But everybody shouted that it wasn't popular back then, probably not now either. But they said you cannot transfer people from one place to another. Is that the only way for like a two-state solution?
Right now, they have to finish the war. They have to get the hostages back. That will start the healing, I believe, for the majority of Israelis. And maybe you could talk about what we're wearing around our neck. You can explain it.
So it says in Hebrew, הלב שלנו שבוי בעזה, bring them home. Our heart is hostage in Gaza. And many Israelis and Jews and people around the world wearing them to raise awareness of bringing back the hostages.
Yeah, everywhere you go in Israel, you see people wearing these. So I started wearing. Actually, I was interviewing the head of an organization, and he was a retired high-level Navy officer who had been one of the leaders of the protest movement last year, 9 months before the war. The October 7th war, there were protests every Saturday night against Prime Minister Netanyahu's proposed judicial change, which would have given any ruling government essentially the power to veto any court ruling. So at the end of the interview, he took it off and handed it to me, put it around my neck. I've been wearing it since.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very emotional.
Yeah, you mentioned the judicial reform.
Yeah.
Again, not trying to get into politics.
Right.
But you also mentioned in your article the organization Brothers in Arms.
Yeah, so he was one of the leaders of Brothers in Arms, yeah.
So these Brothers in Arms who were very vocal last year during the judicial reform demonstrations in Tel Aviv. But since October 7th, we saw many of them joining the war, going to the front in the war, and obviously the judicial reform protest was put on hold. So could you describe their current role in Israel?
Sure. So Brothers in Arms is now Brothers and Sisters for Israel. Before the war, a group of retired or reserved high-level officers from all across the IDF, from the Army to the Air Force to the Navy, decided to raise their voice, and they objected to this proposed judicial change. That grew very fast to 100,000 people protesting every Saturday night in Tel Aviv. And then it grew to other cities, such as Jerusalem. You had tens of thousands, 30,000 on a regular basis in Jerusalem, up in Haifa, Beersheba, Eilat, all across the country. Every Saturday night. On October 7th, a small group, so in the meantime, they created quite a database of people who wanted to protest. And they had 70,000 names, they were very organized. On October 7th, they said, that's on hold. We are now at war. They sent out an email to everyone, please report. They reported, everybody reported, all the reserve, everybody who could report did report. And what they did is they turned their organization overnight into a civil support organization that has, at its peak, 15,000 volunteers. And they were doing everything from providing food, medical assistance, driving people, to extricating people from their homes in the early days of October 7th and afterwards. They were able to get as many as 100,000 people out of their homes in danger areas around Gaza and along the northern border. And they've just done amazing things, everything from training civil guards at small communities how to protect their community, to medical training for EMTs and doctors to save lives. They were very concerned that a lot of people died on October 7th because they didn't have the right medical treatment right away, such as even like tourniquets. A lot of people bled to death. So they've trained, they're in the process of handing out, I think, thousands of kits and training people. They're doing amazing work. They really are. And this is just a microcosm of what's happening in Israel.
Right. It can be the greatest enemies, but when the war is there, Kol Israel arevim ze bazeh. All Israel are responsible for one another. And we also saw it with Judge Aaron Barak, who was the main cause for, according to the Likud party, for their judicial reform, but he was the first one that Israel asked to represent them in The Hague, in the court of law. So that's just to show you how, when you need the best, you get the best, and no matter what the circumstances. I want to have one more question for you, Steve, and then I will open it for a couple of questions if anyone wants to ask, and we'll conclude with the singing of Hatikva. So there's one more thing I would like to ask you. It's about anti-Semitism, in the rise, the surge of anti-Semitism in the U.S. And in your article, you wrote that the American media made Palestinian casualties the main storyline, and that more and more voices are saying that Israel was to blame for October 7th. Could you elaborate on what seems to be a shift in American attitude, as well as the surge of anti-Semitism in the United States in general, and on U.S. campuses in particular, and why, in your opinion, was there so much hate and justification for violence against Israel and Jews following the October 7th massacre?
So I'm going to go to a ADL report that was just released this past week, and it's really discouraging. It says 1 out of 4 Americans hold anti-Semitic views. And this This is up from 9% 10 years ago. So it reflects a change in America in the last 10 years that American Jews need to sit up and think about. We don't talk about this. So the Palestinian narrative, even before the war, has always been a victimhood. The October 7th, after the October 7th, it just took on a life of its own. I think mainly it was pushed on by campuses, such as, even on October 7th, 35 groups from Harvard essentially while Hamas was still killing people, raping people, and mutilating bodies, and dragging people to Gaza, and going on with horrific atrocities. 35 Harvard groups, student groups, put out a statement, a collective statement, that essentially blamed Israel for all of this. And almost immediately, these atrocities were forgotten, and a new storyline was added to the victimhood. The victim, and Israel is apartheid. We've heard that before. Okay. Israel is a colonialist entity. That's a new one. And then here's another one, genocide. All of which has been accepted almost totally by the media. There's no pushback. It's reported as fact. And, most people take things, when someone tells you something, most people take things for the truth. And they're not that. There's not a lot of pushback. The other thing is, and this is unpopular to say, Jews are afraid. And Jews are not in the streets in the way the pro-Palestinians are. Jews could barely muster 1,000 to protest in Boston and in other cities. It's not a regular thing, And then younger Jews are kind of, it's amazing because they're perhaps the most educated generation we've ever had, the Gen X. And they don't have the same connection. Even with birthright, even with all the things they've been given, they don't have the same connection. And they're part of a different, part of the progressive movement. So you have thousands and thousands of people showing up for pro-Palestinian rallies. Even in Boston, just last week, there were thousands. Where is the Jewish grassroots movement to support Israel? It's not there. Older Jews are afraid to do this. They don't have the energy to do this, and younger Jews are not passionate about this, and this is an issue. That combined with the direct lies that people say, I've witnessed this, from the river to the sea. Well, it could mean this, it could mean that. Just like jihad can mean this and that. We know what all of it means, Words hurt, and words are taken at face value, and things are changing, and I would say we need stronger, newer leadership in America, Jewish leadership, at a grassroots level to stand up for Israel. And right now, we don't have that, and that is missing. That's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, is to tell you about my trip, and also just make you aware of what's happening nationally and internationally with anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome.
All this misinformation and propaganda, what comes to mind is החיים והמוות ביד הלשון, ואוהביה יאכל פריה, from Proverbs, that life and death are in the hands of the tongue. and those who appreciate it will eat its fruit. Thank you very much. We will open now, if you have a few questions here and also on Zoom, if you want to type a question, we'll present it to Steve. All right, questions. Let me just make sure it's working.
So the rabbi knows that I feel exactly like Steve, that our students at these schools cannot go hide in their rooms. They have got to organize. I mean, I had one that was at Smith, but that's a whole 5. UMass, I think, has the biggest, Hillel or whatever. And one day, my granddaughter was walking, and she saw that BDS sign, and she was just in no mood to be bothered that day. And whoever it was, she told them, take it down. We're Smithies, we're sisters. She says, you want to have an argument? You want to discuss this? We'll discuss this. And she walked away pulling the sign down. And you know, my granddaughter. And I will tell you that all the years she went to Masco, I could tell you stories that would make your hair fall out about the local anti-Semitism, and she's 23 years old. So it's been around. It's just a new excuse. Before it was we killed Jesus, and now we're killing the Palestinians. It's all one story. And last week I had an opportunity in a senior center lecture when this particular person has an underlying mission. And I just happened to answer him that I was Jewish. And the reason we had differences, and I quoted the Torah portion, is that we made this contract with God, that we would have no other God before God. And I said it's in our prayers, and we take this oath every week if we go to services or whatever. And the whole class asked me a lot more questions. And one particular man said, I understand much better now. So we can't have the ADL alone, what should I say, legalizing. It can't be legalized. It can't be fought in the courts. We really have to get on the ball. And maybe it's because I'm 84 years old and I was born in 1939 and I've lived with this most of my life.
Thank you. Any other questions, maybe? Thank you, Audrey. Questions? All right.
Just had a question. When you were in Israel, I'm not sure if I'm right about this or not, but they're not supposed to, civilians aren't supposed to have firearms. No, they do. Civilians have firearms? So, okay, I'll have to pass on that question because my thought was that if all these Palestinians came across the border and if a lot of them, the civilians had firearms, that they could have defended themselves. But it appears that they didn't have anything to defend themselves. They ran right over them.
No, there were police, there were soldiers,
Talking about like the homeowners and the residents. I know the cops and the military guys.
They were not prepared. They were an army. They came with RPGs, which are rocket-propelled grenades, which are essentially shoulder missiles that are designed to blow up buildings, and they were shooting them at people. There was no way they could defend themselves, and they had submachine guns, grenades, all kinds of weaponry for war. Not to just engage in house to house battle, gun to gun. It would not have been a fair fight if even everyone had a gun. In Israel, by the way, the Israeli gun law is very strict, and not everybody can get a gun. It's nothing like America, where you can get a gun. there are guns that are carried by soldiers, but it used to be quite rare. Would you agree, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not allowed to carry a gun in Israel unless you have a special permit, unless you live, close to the borders. So the kibbutzim in the Gaza area, you have like a security company from the kibbutz, right? They would see what's happening, what's going on. Nobody imagined things like that can happen. It was a total failure, total collapse, as we discussed this before.
Yeah, I mean, a gun can't do anything when you're faced with an RPG,
Yeah, no,
So yeah,
I just hate to be outgunned, that's all,
yeah.
The
And it-
soldiers are walking around with their guns now because they're big.
But even the
Some-
soldiers, let me say this: there were hundreds of soldiers, I think, hundreds of soldiers and policemen who were killed that day because they could not defend themselves against RPGs and grenades. They were not set up for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as far as, being Jewish and protest and stuff, I think traditionally Jewish people are kind of like, I'm not going to say anything.
No, they can't be.
No one likes a bully until you punch him in the mouth. So
Jeff is a
hate to,
a security
hate to sound
person,
like
as you can see. Thank
I
you,
don't know
Jeff.
what, but you got to stand up for yourselves and not let anyone push you around.
Thank you, Jeff. I see that Shlomit wanted to.
I just wanted to, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
I just wanted to add that there were some kibbutzim that were able to defend themselves because the kitat kun, I don't know what to call them, the people who were.
The security.
But it was
squad.
the civil security squads were able to, they heard what was going on and they were able to mobilize fast enough. And we do have some kibbutzim that were able to push them off. But Be'eri and Kfar, all those, it was not a fair fight. But it was 6 a.m., people were pulled out of their beds. It wasn't.
They even took over 6 or 7 military bases,
Yes.
maybe more.
They just murdered them in their beds.
They were just not prepared for anything like this. And obviously, things have changed now.
Let me take just one question here on Zoom. I have heard a few reports that the media accounts in Israel, this is by Ann Schwartz, are restricted to very patriotic info, not the full account of the extent of the death in Gaza. Any comments?
Well, I think the reader should go to haaretz.com, which reports more on the Palestinians, I think, than on Israel. Haaretz, HAARETZ.com. And you can read all about what's happening there. That is an Israeli news organization based in Tel Aviv. And I can assure you, all the reporters are Israeli, just about.
Thank you very much. Let's just have one more question and we'll conclude with Atikva. Wait, they can hear you on Zoom.
I would just like to make a comment. I think that we, the Jewish people, have become complacent over all the years what's been going on and all the forces that have been pulling Israel apart. And then when you come into the States and you look at the teachers that are at the colleges and what they're teaching, we don't have a rapid response. An organization that the minute Hamas says something, we're not there to dispute it. So from a media point of view, they've outdistanced us and we're behind the 8 ball. The other thing is we've given so much money to all of these institutions, and now you see what's happening. There should be an about face and everything should be pulled. And the only way you fight war is by war itself. Because Hamas, the only thing they understand is when they're dead. And I hate to say that, and that's what it comes down to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Use it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for your questions and wise inputs. And yeah, it was, and thank you to Anne also for her question. And Steve, thank you, my friend. It was such a, I mean, I learned so much tonight. I hope that everyone also got this. It was meaningful to you and educational, and it was to me. We should do it more often, man.
I have to go back to Israel. I have to go back to Israel soon.
But you know, you need to make it as a traveling show.
Yeah.
Here, or Sharat Hayam, but other synagogues, they need to see this, they need to hear it, and then they understand it.
So I would like to ask you to please rise as you're able as we conclude with the Tikva, the Israeli national anthem. And our friends on Zoom, please join us. We love to see your lips moving. כל עוד בלבב פנימה נפש יהודי הומיה ולפתי מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון וירושלים. Thank you again so very much for joining us here and on Zoom. Thank you very much to our amazing guest, Steve Rosenberg. Please join us. We have some sweets in the back and water. Please feel free to join us. Thank you.
Nice to see the face.